I was only 7 years old when the blade appeared. It was just lying there, right on the floor of my mother's room. It had a dark handle, and the edge caught the light with a strange, unnatural gleam that no normal metal possesses. Right next to it was a robe, deep, neatly folded, and waiting. The terrifying truth was, I recognized them both. The night before, my spirit had traveled while my body slept. I was taken to an unfamiliar place, a realm where no young child should ever set foot. In that place, those exact objects had been handed to me. The robe and the knife. And I was instructed on their purpose, and what would soon be required of me. When morning came, I looked at my mother and said, "Mama, I had an awful dream last night. I went to a strange place, and they handed me a gown and a knife." She didn't flinch. She didn't look alarmed. Instead, she looked at me with the expression of someone whose long-awaited expectation had finally arrived. She simply said, "That was no dream." Then she told me to follow her. She led me straight into her bedroom. And there they were. The precise items from that nighttime realm, manifested physically in the waking world. Inside my own home. In the very house where I was being raised. My name is Gideon Mulenga Kabila. Before I ever drew my first breath, my life had already been signed over to the kingdom of darkness. This is my unvarnished truth. Before we go any further, there is something you must absolutely comprehend. I never went looking for the occult. The occult was already waiting for my arrival. My mother's entire lineage belonged to the kingdom of darkness. This wasn't a case of someone casually experimenting with witchcraft, or a young person making a foolish mistake they didn't understand. My mother was born into a generational bloodline that had bound itself to Satan through centuries of covenants. It was a birthright, and she fully intended to pass that inheritance down to me. My upbringing took place in Zambia. It is a land of rich copper, crimson soil, vast horizons, and deep forests. The people there carry incredible warmth, but they also live alongside the heavy spiritual realities that operate in the shadows. On paper, Zambia is a Christian nation. You see churches on every street corner. You hear worship songs drifting through the morning air, and the name of Jesus is spoken by millions. Yet beneath that visible surface lies a hidden world that the majority of those millions have never encountered, and would never want to. To the outside world, I was just a regular boy. I went to school, played with friends, and lived the normal routines of any Zambian youth. But underneath that ordinary exterior, a dark foundation was being laid. A split existence. A claim had been placed on my soul long before I even knew how to articulate it. My mother never attempted to hide her true nature from me. That is always the hardest detail to explain to people. She didn't use deception or trickery to recruit me into the fold. She was completely transparent. She told me exactly who she was, the kingdom she served, and the expectations she held for my life. She would tell me, "You belong to a different realm." She didn't say it to terrify me. She stated it as a plain, unalterable fact, the same way a parent might tell a child about their ancestral village or family tribe. This is your origin. This is what you are. I was far too young to question her words, far too young to fight back, and completely unaware that this heritage was actually a spiritual prison being constructed around me, brick by brick. Everything changed the night I turned 7. The clock struck midnight. I know the exact hour because that is when the spiritual tides shift. The kingdom of darkness doesn't operate in the light of day, it moves when the natural world is fast asleep and a household's spiritual guards are down. Midnight, the threshold where one day ends and another hasn't yet begun. I was lying in my bed, deep in sleep. At least, I assumed I was sleeping. Then the whispers started. They weren't loud or booming. They were low, persistent murmurs coming from just outside my bedroom window, like water slowly seeping through structural cracks. I couldn't understand the words, but the malice and intent behind them were palpable. Something was being summoned to my room. Suddenly, the very atmosphere altered. The darkness around me transformed. It wasn't the mere absence of light, not the natural, quiet darkness of the night that every child is used to. This was a heavy, dense presence. A living weight that filled the entire bedroom from floor to ceiling. And then, he appeared. A massive, shadowy figure. He was towering, so large that his form didn't seem to fit within the physical dimensions of the room, making the walls look as though they were bending away from him. He moved toward my bed with a slow, deliberate pace that was far more terrifying than if he had rushed. Speed implies you have a chance to run. That slowness communicated, there is no rush. You cannot escape. He came to a halt right at the edge of my bed. Then he spoke. He said, "It is time to depart for the other world." I wish I could tell you that I resisted. I wish I could say that even at 7 years old, some righteous instinct inside me rose up to fight. But that would be a lie. I was a tiny child staring up at an entity that shouldn't exist, frozen in a state of absolute, paralyzing dread. He told me, "You do not require physical transport. This is a realm of the spirit. Give me your hands." I reached out and placed my hands in his. And instantly, I vanished. One moment I was in my bed in Zambia, and the next, I was somewhere completely foreign. I call it a place because it possessed a distinct geography. It had structures, boundaries, and inhabitants, but it operated entirely outside the laws of the physical earth. It was deep underground. No one had to tell me this, you could literally feel the immense weight of the world pressing down from above. Yet, it wasn't dark. It was illuminated by a harsh, artificial, electric glare. The light didn't come from a sun or a fire, it emanated from everywhere and nowhere all at once, a freezing, clinical light that exposed everything without offering a shred of warmth. As I looked around, I saw countless figures. They looked like people, moving with rigid, calculated purpose. The entire place was highly organized. Every single entity knew its exact role, its task, and its function within this massive, unfolding machinery. Then, the formal processing began. I describe them as interviews because that is exactly how they felt. It was a highly structured, bureaucratic procedure. Questions were put to me, terms were outlined, and a covenant was drawn up and explained with the code efficiency of a system that had done this millions of times before. They revealed their identities. They told me what they required from me, and they promised what I would receive in return: immense power, spiritual protection, authority, and a high rank within a hierarchy that stretched far beyond anything on the earth's surface. And then they laid out the price. At 7 years old, I couldn't comprehend the magnitude of the contract I was signing. I couldn't grasp what it truly meant. But I nodded my head. I gave my consent. I entered into the covenant. They placed the dark robe over my shoulders. It felt incredibly heavy, but it was a weight that had nothing to do with fabric. They handed the black-handled knife to my grip. The blade felt warm to the touch, even though no physical flame was near it. They looked at me and said, "This knife is for the sacrifices. Learn to wield it masterfully." In the next blink, I was back. Back in my own bed. Back in my room. Surrounded by the normal quiet of the Zambian night. I lay motionless for a long time. Finally, I stood up and walked into my mother's bedroom. I recounted the entire experience to her. She looked directly at me and said, "That was no dream. Come here." She walked me over, and there on her bedroom floor sat the physical robe and the knife. Exactly as they had appeared in the realm below. Real. Solid. Tangible. The spiritual reality had crossed over completely into the physical world. Standing there at 7 years old, staring at that black blade on the floor, my mother looked down at me and said, "This belongs to you now. That realm is where I belong, and it is where you belong too." Then she uttered the words that would dictate the course of my youth. She said, "Now, I am going to teach you how to take a life. will not break down the specific details of what my mother taught me over the subsequent years. I omit these steps not to shield you from the harsh realities, but because detailing certain occult practices opens spiritual doors that are best left firmly shut. What I will say is that she was an incredibly meticulous instructor. She was patient and systematic, never rushing my training. She understood that constructing a servant of darkness required time if the foundation was going to hold. She taught me the exact chain of command within the kingdom, who held authority over whom, and what each rank demanded and received. She taught me the laws. Because the kingdom of darkness is governed by strict commandments, protocols, and code of conduct that its agents must follow with absolute military precision. She instructed me on astral projection, how to detach my spirit from my physical form and traverse the world completely invisible to the human eye. I learned how to occupy a room without a single soul sensing my presence, observing targets, gathering intelligence, and carrying out missions without leaving a single physical trace behind. And she taught me the use of the knife. I will only say this about that blade: it was never used for anything ordinary or mundane. Every single action carried out with it was deliberate, recorded, and designed to elevate my status within that dark kingdom. That is how promotion works in that realm. You advance solely through sacrifice. The more you surrender to the altar, the more authority you are granted. The more destruction you cause, the more power flows into your hands. It is a terrifying, mathematical equation. Every ounce of power gained is paid for by someone else's devastation. Every promotion is financed by human agony. By the time I reached young adulthood, 80 people had been sacrificed through my assignments. 80. I want you to genuinely sit with that number. These were not abstract statistics. They were 80 distinct human beings whose lives, futures, and destinies were cut short or shattered by my actions, my assignments, and the dark training passed down by my mother from the moment I entered that covenant as a child. 80 souls. And with every sacrifice, my rank climbed higher. Eventually, I was appointed as the junior assistant to the master overseer for the eastern, central, and southern regions of the African continent. I was no longer just a student under my mother's wing. I was an active official, an administrator of darkness overseeing a massive multi-regional territory. And I possessed the credentials to prove it. A literal degree issued by the Voodoo School of Witchcraft. Let me shed some light on how the underworld actually operates. One of my primary responsibilities as I rose through the ranks was education, which required me to fully understand the structural layout and commercial output of the underground realm. This level of insight isn't granted to low-level initiates, it is reserved strictly for high-ranking officials. And you need to understand how it works. The realm below contains actual factories. These are not metaphors. They are highly organized, structural operations that function with the exact same logistics as any assembly line on Earth, processing inputs to generate commercial outputs that are sent directly back to the surface. The raw inputs: human lives, bodies, blood. The essential life force harvested through occult sacrifices, engineered accidents, and the various methods the kingdom employs to drain the surface world. The finished outputs: everyday consumer goods. Listen to me very carefully. The items manufactured in those underground chambers do not stay there. They are distributed directly into the global marketplace. They sit on normal store shelves. People wear them, eat them, and bring them into their homes as gifts. Clothing, food, everyday items that appear completely benign, leaving the consumer with absolutely no idea of their true origin. The ultimate goal of distributing these goods isn't just financial wealth, it is spiritual initiation. Anyone who interacts with or consumes specific products tied to those factories establishes an unconscious link to the kingdom. A spiritual attachment is formed, an open doorway is created. Furthermore, the underworld operates its own universities. Actual institutions of learning complete with structured curricula, specialized fields of study, and formal graduation ceremonies. I walked those halls. I sat in those classrooms. The Voodoo School of Witchcraft was a literal institution, that was its exact title, not a sensationalized name. And the degree they handed me upon graduation was a tangible, physical document that I brought back with me into the natural world. A document that would eventually cost me absolutely everything. But that is a reality we will explore in part 2. Today, I have shown you how my journey into the depth of darkness began. I have recounted the midnight entity, the astral travel, the covenant enacted before I even understood the concept of a vow, the mother who trained me to destroy, and the blade that moved between dimensions. But the most critical turning point is yet to come. It took place at a major Christian conference, a massive gathering of believers that I had been formally deployed to infiltrate and dismantle. It was supposed to be a routine operation, a task I had successfully executed dozens of times before without a single hitch. But on that specific day, I dropped my briefcase. A completely simple, seemingly accidental moment. My documents scattered across the floor of the conference hall for everyone to see. And right there, exposed among the papers, was my physical degree from the Voodoo School of Witchcraft. It was picked up by a pastor who looked down and read exactly what was written on it. In that single, fleeting second, everything shattered. I didn't realize it at the moment. But those dropped papers marked the absolute end of my life in the kingdom of darkness, and the sudden dawn of something completely new. Part 2 is on the way. Make sure to subscribe and enable your notifications. Because what transpired after those documents hit the floor will reveal a truth about the power of God that no standard sermon can ever fully capture. He can use the smallest, most ordinary accident to completely shatter the absolute greatest darkness.
Shabonga kusasa.